The morning my sister Carmen slammed her fist on my bedroom door at exactly 7:15, screaming that I was nothing but a lazy parasite who slept her life away while the family crumbled around me, I knew it was time. Time to show them exactly what I had been dreaming up during all those hours they thought I was wasting under my covers. I rolled over in my bed, pulled the laptop closer to my chest, and smiled as I looked at the screen showing my cryptocurrency portfolio. They had no idea what was coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Diana Castellanos, and I am 28 years old. For the past 2 years, my family has treated me like I'm some kind of burden, rolling their eyes every time I emerge from my bedroom after what they call my marathon sleeping sessions. They whisper about me in the kitchen, wondering when I'm going to get my act together, when I'm going to stop being such a disappointment. If only they knew that every single hour they thought I was sleeping, I was actually building something that would change all our lives forever. I live in my childhood home in Millbrook Heights, a middle-class neighborhood where everyone knows everyone else's business. The house is a modest 2-story colonial that my parents bought 30 years ago when they still believed in the American dream. Now it feels more like a prison, with my mother Helena constantly sighing about the mortgage payments and my father Roberto working double shifts at the manufacturing plant just to keep us afloat. My sister Carmen, who moved back home after her divorce, acts like she's the responsible one, even though she contributes exactly $0 to the household expenses. The irony is that while they see me as the family failure, I'm actually the only one who has been working on a real solution to our financial problems. But explaining cryptocurrency trading and blockchain technology to people who still think the internet is mainly for checking email seemed pointless. So I let them believe what they wanted to believe while I quietly built an empire from my bedroom. It started 18 months ago when I lost my job at the insurance company. The official reason was budget cuts, but I knew it was really because I had caught my supervisor stealing client premiums and reported it to corporate. Rather than deal with the whistleblower situation properly, they decided it was easier to eliminate my position entirely. I was devastated at first, spending the first few weeks actually sleeping as much as my family claimed I did. Depression is a real thing, and losing a job you thought was secure can knock you flat. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the endless stream of rejection emails from potential employers, or maybe it was hearing Carmen tell our mother that I was becoming a permanent mooch. Something inside me snapped, not in a breaking way, but in a focusing way. I realized that if I was going to be stuck in this house anyway, I might as well use the time to educate myself about something that could actually make a difference. I had always been good with numbers and patterns. In college, I had majored in mathematics with a minor in computer science, but I had never really applied those skills to anything more exciting than insurance actuarial tables. Now, suddenly, I had time and motivation to dive deep into something that had been nagging at the edges of my consciousness: cryptocurrency. The first month was pure education. While my family thought I was hibernating like some kind of depressed bear, I was actually consuming every piece of information I could find about blockchain technology, market analysis, and trading strategies. I read white papers until my eyes burned. I watched YouTube tutorials from successful traders. I joined Discord servers and Reddit communities where people shared strategies and market insights. I learned about technical analysis, fundamental analysis, and most importantly, risk management. Carmen would bang on my door around noon every day, shouting something about how normal people don't sleep until the afternoon. She had no idea that I had been awake since 4 in the morning analyzing Asian markets and European trading patterns. The beauty of cryptocurrency is that it never sleeps, and neither do the opportunities. While she was getting her 8 hours of traditional sleep, I was learning to read market signals from Tokyo and London. My mother Helena was more passive-aggressive about my sleeping habits. She would make loud comments in the hallway about how she wished she could just sleep her problems away instead of facing reality. She would slam dishes in the kitchen and vacuum outside my bedroom door at strategic times, trying to guilt me into emerging and pretending to look for a traditional job. Meanwhile,
I was building spreadsheets that tracked market correlations and developing algorithms that could predict price movements with 73% accuracy. The hardest part was hiding my activities from them. Every time someone knocked on my door, I had to quickly close my trading platforms and pretend I had just woken up. I kept a glass of water by my bed and would splash some on my face to look groggy. I would stretch and yawn dramatically, playing the role they expected me to play. It was exhausting maintaining this facade, but it was also strangely liberating. For the first time in my life, I had a secret that was entirely my own. My father, Roberto, was the most understanding, probably because he worked such long hours that he rarely saw me anyway. But even he would sometimes look at me with this mixture of concern and disappointment that made my stomach twist.
He would ask gentle questions about my job search and offer to help me update my resume. I felt terrible lying to him, but I knew he wouldn't understand what I was trying to accomplish. To him, work meant showing up somewhere every day and collecting a paycheck. The idea that you could make money while supposedly sleeping would seem like fantasy. By month 3, I had started paper trading, which means making theoretical trades without real money to test my strategies. I was getting good results, but I knew that trading with fake money is psychologically different from trading with real money. The emotional component changes everything when your actual financial future is on the line. I needed capital to start real trading, but I had spent my savings during the first few weeks of unemployment. I needed a way to get seed money without my family finding out. That's when I started selling things. Small things at first. Old jewelry that I never wore, textbooks from college that were taking up space, electronics that I had upgraded over the years. I used online marketplaces and met buyers in coffee shops, always making sure my family didn't know about these transactions. I told them I was finally cleaning out my room, which they saw as a positive sign of personal growth. They had no idea I was liquidating assets to fund my trading account. Each sale brought me closer to my goal of having enough capital to make meaningful trades. I wasn't looking to get rich quick, despite what people think about cryptocurrency. I was building a systematic approach that could generate consistent returns over time. The key was diversification and risk management, not betting everything on the next big coin that promised to moon overnight. Carmen's attitude toward me grew nastier as the months progressed. She had moved back home because her ex-husband had left her with substantial debt and she couldn't afford her own place. Rather than acknowledging that she was also dependent on her parents, she seemed to need someone to look down on, and I was the perfect target. She would make snide comments about my sleeping schedule whenever we crossed paths in the kitchen. She would tell her mother that I was setting a bad example and that tough love was needed to motivate me. What she didn't know was that her own financial situation was about to become my business, whether she liked it or not. During one of her loud phone conversations with her friend Melissa, which I could hear perfectly through our thin walls, she mentioned that she owed $18,000 on credit cards and had been making minimum payments for over a year. She was trapped in a debt cycle that would take her decades to escape at the interest rates she was paying. I started running calculations in my head about how quickly I could generate enough profit to solve her problem, even though she had been nothing but cruel to me. My mother Helena's financial stress was more visible. I would hear her on the phone with creditors, trying to negotiate payment plans for medical bills from my father's recent surgery. She thought she was being discreet, but sound travels in old houses. She would pace the kitchen late at night, going through papers and making lists, trying to figure out how to stretch their income to cover all the expenses. My father's insurance from the plant was decent, but it didn't cover everything, and the copays and deductibles were eating into their savings. Roberto tried to hide his exhaustion, but I could see it wearing on him. He had started picking up weekend shifts and holiday shifts, anything to bring in extra money. At 55, he was working more hours than he had in his 20s, and it was taking a toll on his health. I would hear him coughing at night and see him moving more slowly in the mornings. The man who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework was wearing himself out trying to keep our family afloat, and I was supposedly just sleeping through it all. By month 6, I had my trading account funded and was making small, careful trades. I started with conservative strategies, focusing on established cryptocurrencies rather than speculative altcoins. Bitcoin, Ethereum, a few other projects with solid fundamentals and good technical patterns.
I was making steady gains, nothing spectacular, but consistent profits that compounded over time. More importantly, I was learning to manage my emotions during both winning and losing trades. The psychological aspect of trading is something that no amount of technical knowledge can prepare you for. When you watch your account balance swing up and down by hundreds or thousands of dollars in real time, it tests every assumption you have about risk and reward. I had to develop strict rules about position sizing and stop losses, and more importantly, I had to develop the discipline to follow those rules even when my emotions were screaming at me to do something different. During this period, my family's comments about my sleeping became more pointed. Carmen started leaving passive-aggressive notes on my door about job opportunities she had found online. My mother began making comments about how she hoped I was at least using my sleeping time to think about my future. Even my father, bless his heart, started asking more direct questions about my plans and whether I needed help getting back on my feet. The hardest part was watching them struggle financially while knowing that I was sitting on a growing solution.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
My trading account was steadily increasing, but it wasn't yet large enough to make a meaningful difference in their lives. I needed more time and more capital to reach the point where I could really help them. But every day I delayed telling them the truth was another day they suffered unnecessary stress, and another day they resented me for my apparent laziness. Month 9 was when things really started accelerating. I had refined my strategies to the point where I was consistently profitable, and I had saved enough from my gains to increase my position sizes. More capital meant larger profits, which meant even more capital for the next round of trades. The compounding effect was starting to kick in, and my account balance was growing faster than I had initially projected. But it was also when the family tension reached a breaking point. Carmen had started making comments about how I was taking advantage of our parents' generosity and how they needed to set boundaries with me. She suggested that they should start charging me rent or give me an ultimatum about finding work. My mother was clearly torn between wanting to support me and feeling resentful about the financial burden I represented. My father was just tired, too tired to deal with family drama on top of everything else. I knew I was running out of time to maintain my cover story. The longer I waited to reveal what I had been doing, the harder it would be to explain why I had kept it secret for so long. But I also knew that I was close to a breakthrough that would make all the deception worth it. My account balance was approaching 6 figures, and I had identified several opportunities that could potentially double or triple my capital within just a few months. The cryptocurrency market was entering one of its cyclical bull runs, and all my research suggested that we were still in the early stages. The coins I had been accumulating during the quieter periods were starting to move, and my technical analysis indicated that much larger moves were coming. If I was right about the timing, I was looking at the possibility of generating enough wealth to solve every financial problem my family was facing. But first, I had to survive the increasing pressure from Carmen and the growing concern from my parents. Carmen had started talking about intervention strategies and tough love approaches. She was convinced that enabling my sleeping habits was preventing me from growing up and taking responsibility for my life. She had no idea that I was taking more responsibility for our family's future than anyone else in the house. Month 12 was when everything changed. The bull market I had been anticipating finally materialized, and several of my positions experienced massive gains over the course of just a few weeks. Coins that I had bought during quiet periods suddenly doubled, tripled, and in some cases increased by 10 times their original value. My portfolio balance went from 6 figures to 7 figures almost overnight. I remember sitting in my bedroom at 3 in the morning, staring at my laptop screen and trying to process what had just happened. The numbers didn't seem real. I refreshed the page multiple times, thinking there might be a glitch in the exchange's reporting system. But the balances were accurate. In less than 2 weeks, I had generated more wealth than my father would earn in 20 years of working at the plant. The irony was almost overwhelming. While my family slept peacefully in their beds, unaware of what had just occurred,
I was wide awake, experiencing a level of financial success that most people only dream about. All those months of them thinking I was wasting my life sleeping, I had actually been working harder and more strategically than any of them had ever worked. I had been preparing for this moment when the market would reward my patience and research with life-changing returns. But with great success came great responsibility. I now had the power to solve every financial problem my family was facing, but I also had to figure out how to reveal this information without destroying my relationships with them. How do you tell people who have been worried about your future that you're actually more financially secure than they could imagine? How do you explain that their concern was misplaced and that their resentment was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what you were doing with your time? I spent the next few days carefully planning my revelation. I couldn't just walk into the kitchen and announce that I was now wealthy. They would think I was having some kind of breakdown or that I had gotten involved in something illegal. I needed to prepare them gradually and provide evidence that would convince them I was telling the truth. More importantly, I needed to do it in a way that would repair our relationships rather than damage them further. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Carmen's latest outburst about my sleeping habits escalated into a family meeting where she demanded that our parents give me an ultimatum. She wanted them to tell me that I had 30 days to find a job and start contributing to household expenses, or I would have to find somewhere else to live. She was tired of watching me take advantage of their kindness while she was working hard to rebuild her life after her divorce. As I listened to her rant about responsibility and accountability, I realized that this was the perfect moment to turn the tables. She had no idea that she was about to learn something that would change her perspective on everything.
None of them did. They were about to discover that the family member they had written off as a failure was actually the one who'd been working the hardest to secure their future. I asked them to give me 24 hours before making any decisions about ultimatums or deadlines. I told them I had something important to show them that would change how they viewed my situation. Carmen rolled her eyes and made a comment about how I was probably going to present some fantasy business plan that would never work. My parents looked skeptical, but agreed to wait one more day before taking any action. That night, I prepared a presentation that would explain everything. I gathered screenshots of my trading account, printed out statements showing my transaction history, and created a simple overview of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology that would help them understand what I had been doing. I also prepared a proposal for how I wanted to use my gains to help each of them with their specific financial challenges. For Carmen, I had calculated exactly how much money it would take to pay off all her credit card debt and give her a fresh start. For my parents, I had researched the costs of paying off their medical bills and setting up a fund that would allow my father to reduce his working hours. I had also looked into the costs of home improvements that would increase the value of our house and make it more comfortable for them as they aged. But most importantly, I had to find a way to apologize for the deception while helping them understand why I had felt it was necessary. I needed them to see that my secrecy wasn't about disrespecting them or taking advantage of their support. It was about protecting a fragile opportunity that could have been destroyed by well-meaning interference or skepticism. The next evening, I called another family meeting. This time, I was the one setting the agenda. I could see the resignation in my parents' faces and the satisfaction in Carmen's expression. They all thought they knew what was coming. They thought I was finally going to admit defeat and accept their ultimatum. They had no idea that I was about to reveal the biggest surprise of their lives. I started by acknowledging their concerns about my sleeping habits and their frustration with my apparent lack of direction. I apologized for the stress I had caused them and for not being more communicative about what I was doing with my time. Then, I asked them to listen with open minds to what I was about to tell them because it was going to sound unbelievable at first. When I opened my laptop and showed them my trading account balance, the silence in the room was deafening. Carmen's mouth literally fell open. My mother grabbed my father's arm so hard that he winced. My father just stared at the screen, blinking slowly like he was trying to process what he was seeing. The number on the screen was $1.7 million. Carmen was the first to speak, and her voice was barely a whisper.
She asked if the numbers were real, if this was some kind of joke or computer simulation. I logged into multiple exchanges and showed them the same balance across different platforms. I showed them my transaction history, proving that these gains had been accumulated over months of careful trading rather than one lucky bet. My mother started crying, not from sadness, but from relief and overwhelming emotion. She had been carrying so much financial stress for so long that seeing this solution felt like a miracle. My father just kept shaking his head and asking how this was possible, how someone could make this kind of money from a bedroom computer. I spent the next 2 hours explaining everything: the months of education and research, the development of trading strategies, the careful risk management that had allowed me to build wealth steadily rather than losing everything on risky gambles. I showed them the educational resources I had used, the communities I had joined, and the mentors I had learned from online. But what seemed to impact them most was when I explained why I had kept it secret. I told them about the fragile psychology of trading and how external pressure or skepticism could have derailed my progress. I explained that I had needed to build confidence in my abilities before I could handle the opinions and advice of people who didn't understand what I was doing. Carmen's transformation was the most dramatic. She went from angry and resentful to shocked to apologetic in the span of an hour. She started apologizing for all the cruel things she had said about my sleeping habits and for pressuring our parents to kick me out. She had no idea that while she was judging me for being lazy, I was actually working harder than I had ever worked in my life. But I didn't want her apologies. I wanted to help solve the problems that had made our family life so stressful. I pulled out the proposal I had prepared and explained how I wanted to use my gains to help each of them. For Carmen, I offered to pay off her $18,000 in credit card debt immediately, giving her a fresh start without the crushing interest payments that were keeping her trapped. For my parents, I proposed paying off their medical bills and setting up an investment account that would generate enough passive income to allow my father to work fewer hours.
I also suggested renovations to the house that would make it more comfortable and increase its value for their retirement. The emotional release in that room was incredible. Months of tension and resentment dissolved as they realized that their financial struggles were over. But more than that, they began to understand that I hadn't been sleeping through their problems. I had been working on solutions, while they thought I was being irresponsible. My father cried, which I had never seen before. He talked about how worried he had been about his health and his ability to keep working such long hours. The idea that he could reduce his schedule and spend more time with family while still maintaining financial security was overwhelming for him. My mother immediately started talking about all the things she had been putting off because of money concerns, medical appointments, dental work, even small luxuries like replacing worn-out appliances. The relief of not having to worry about every expense was transformative for her. But perhaps the most important outcome was the restoration of our family relationships. Carmen and I were able to have an honest conversation about how her resentment toward me had really been about her own financial insecurity and feelings of failure after her divorce. When I removed her financial stress by paying off her debts, it also removed the emotional burden that had been poisoning our relationship. My parents' pride in my accomplishment was overwhelming. They had been so worried about my future, so concerned that I wasn't developing the skills needed to succeed in life. Discovering that I had not only developed those skills, but had used them to achieve extraordinary success was a revelation that changed how they saw me forever. Within a week, I had transferred the money to pay off Carmen's debts and my parents' medical bills. I set up investment accounts that would provide them with steady, passive income. I hired contractors to begin renovating the house with improvements that would make it more comfortable and valuable. Most importantly, I had transformed our family dynamic from stress and conflict to gratitude and mutual respect. The neighborhood noticed the changes quickly. New cars in the driveway, contractors working on the house, and a general sense of optimism that replaced the tension that had been hanging over our family. People asked questions, but we kept the details private. We simply said that I had been working on some investments that had done well. 6 months later, our lives were completely different. My father was working normal hours and had time for hobbies he had abandoned years ago. My mother was taking art classes and traveling to visit relatives she hadn't seen in years because of financial constraints. Carmen had started her own business and was dating someone new, someone who treated her with the respect she deserved. And me? I continued trading, but now with the confidence that comes from having already achieved financial security. I was no longer sleeping 16 hours a day because I no longer needed to hide my activities. I had my own office in the house, and my family understood and respected what I was doing. They even started asking me to teach them about cryptocurrency and investing. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. For months, they had been worried about my sleeping habits, thinking that I was wasting my life and avoiding responsibility. In reality, I had been working harder and more strategically than any of them to secure not just my own future, but theirs as well. While they slept peacefully through the night, I had been awake in global markets, building the foundation for our family's financial freedom. The lesson I learned wasn't just about cryptocurrency or trading strategies. It was about the difference between appearing productive and actually being productive. It was about having the courage to pursue unconventional paths when conventional wisdom isn't working. Most importantly, it was about the power of persistence and education to transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone you care about. Today, when people ask me about my success, I tell them that it started with being misunderstood. Sometimes the people who appeared to be doing nothing are actually doing everything. Sometimes the family member who seems to be sleeping through life is actually dreaming up solutions that will change everything. And sometimes the biggest risks and the biggest rewards come from having the courage to pursue opportunities that others don't understand or believe in. My family learned that judging someone's productivity by traditional standards can blind you to innovative approaches that might be more effective than anything conventional. They learn that supporting someone's unconventional path, even when you don't understand it, can lead to outcomes that benefit everyone involved. But most importantly, we all learned that financial stress doesn't have to be a permanent condition. With the right knowledge, the right strategy, and the willingness to work hard in ways that others might not recognize as work, it's possible to create wealth that can transform multiple generations of a family. The title of my story could have been about sleeping too much, but it was really about dreaming big enough to make those dreams reality.
While my family worried about my sleeping habits, I was busy creating their financial awakening, and that made every misunderstood moment, every critical comment, and every sleepless night worth it. Looking back now, I realized that the moment everything truly began to shift wasn't when I first discovered cryptocurrency, or even when I made my first profitable trade. It was the morning I woke up to find my laptop screen frozen on a trading platform showing a loss of $3,000 overnight. My hand shook as I refreshed the page, hoping it was some kind of technical glitch, but the red numbers stared back at me with brutal honesty. In one night, I had lost nearly half of my carefully accumulated trading capital to a market crash that I hadn't seen coming. I sat there in my pajamas at 5:30 in the morning, staring at the devastation on my screen and feeling like the biggest fool who ever lived. All those months of research, all those hours of analysis, all that confidence I had been building about my trading abilities, and I had just proven that I was exactly what my family thought I was, a failure, hiding behind fantasies of success. The crash had been triggered by regulatory news from China that sent ripples through the entire cryptocurrency market. Coins that had been climbing steadily for weeks suddenly dropped 20, 30, sometimes 50% in a matter of hours. My carefully diversified portfolio offered no protection when the entire market moved in the same direction, and my stop losses hadn't triggered fast enough to prevent massive damage to my account balance. But what hurt more than the financial loss was the realization that I had become overconfident. I had started believing my own success story before it was actually written. The steady gains of the previous months had made me feel invincible, like I had discovered some secret formula that guaranteed profits. The market had just reminded me that there are no guarantees in trading, only probabilities and risk management strategies that sometimes fail spectacularly. I closed my laptop and crawled back under my covers, but not to sleep. For the first time in months, I was actually hiding from reality rather than working toward a solution. The weight of potential failure pressed down on me like a physical force. What if my family was right about me? What if I really was just a dreamer who would never amount to anything? What if I had been fooling myself into thinking I could build wealth through trading when I was really just gambling with money I couldn't afford to lose? The cruel irony was that this crash happened just 2 days after Carmen's latest tirade about my sleeping habits. She had stood outside my bedroom door at 7 in the morning, shouting about how I was wasting my life while she was getting ready for another day of actual work. She had no idea that I had been awake since 4, analyzing European market movements, or that I was about to lose more money in one night than she made in 2 months at her administrative job. For 3 days, I didn't open my trading platforms. I couldn't bear to look at the numbers or analyze what had gone wrong. Instead, I did what my family expected me to do. I actually slept. Not the productive kind of rest that comes after a good day's work, but the heavy, dreamless sleep of depression and defeat. I would wake up in the afternoon feeling groggy and disoriented, exactly matching the image they had of me as someone who couldn't handle the responsibilities of adult life. My mother knocked on my door the second afternoon, asking if I was feeling sick. There was genuine concern in her voice, which made everything worse. She had been worried about my health for months, thinking that my unusual sleep schedule was a sign of depression or some other medical problem. Now I was proving her right, but for reasons she couldn't possibly understand. Helena brought me soup and sat on the edge of my bed while I pretended to eat it. She talked about her own struggles with depression after my father's accident years earlier, how she had learned that sometimes the hardest thing to do is ask for help when you need it. She offered to help me look for jobs again, to drive me to interviews, to do whatever it took to help me get back on my feet. Her kindness was devastating because I knew she was trying to solve a problem that didn't exist while ignoring the real problem that I couldn't explain to her. Carmen was less sympathetic. She made pointed comments about how my latest sleeping marathon was proof that I needed professional help or a serious wake-up call. She suggested that our parents stop enabling my behavior by providing free room and board without any requirements for contribution or progress. She was tired of watching them stress about finances while supporting someone who seemed determined to avoid responsibility. What she didn't know was that her comments about enabling and responsibility were actually helping me process what had happened with my trading account. She was right that I had been avoiding responsibility, just not in the way she thought. I had been avoiding the responsibility of properly managing risk in my trading strategy. I had been so focused on making profits that I had neglected the boring but crucial work of protecting those profits from market volatility. On the 4th day, I finally forced myself to open my laptop and face the damage. The numbers were still brutal, but they weren't at quite as bad as I remembered. The market had recovered slightly, and some of my positions had bounced back from their lowest points. More importantly, I still had enough capital left to continue trading if I could develop a better risk management strategy.
That's when I made a decision that would prove to be more important than any trade I ever executed. Instead of trying to win back my losses quickly through larger, riskier positions, I was going to start over with a more conservative approach. I was going to treat this crash as an expensive education rather than a catastrophic failure. I was going to learn from every mistake I had made and build a more robust trading system that could survive future market turbulence. I spent the next week doing something I should have done months earlier. I researched every major cryptocurrency crash of the previous decade, analyzing what had triggered them and how long the markets had taken to recover. I studied the portfolios of successful long-term traders, focusing on how they managed risk rather than how they picked winning trades.
I learned about position sizing, portfolio theory, and the psychological aspects of trading that determine whether someone succeeds or fails over the long term. Most importantly, I began to understand that my previous success had been more about timing and luck than skill. I had started trading during a generally rising market, which had masked the weaknesses in my strategy. The crash had revealed those weaknesses in a painful but necessary way. Now I had the opportunity to build something more sustainable if I was willing to do the hard work of proper preparation. My family noticed that my sleeping patterns had changed again, but they interpreted it as a return to my problematic habits rather than a sign that I was working harder than ever. I was back to staying awake until the early morning hours, but now I was studying market psychology and risk management theory instead of just analyzing price charts and looking for quick profits. The difference was subtle but crucial. Before the crash, I had been learning how to make money in good market conditions. Now I was learning how to preserve money in bad market conditions, which is actually the more important skill for long-term success. Any fool can make money when everything is going up, but it takes real knowledge and discipline to avoid giving it all back when the market turns against you. Carmen's criticism during this period was particularly sharp because she could see that I was back to my old schedule of sleeping during the day and being active at night. She had no idea that I was essentially attending a graduate-level course in quantitative finance, taught by the most expensive professor in the world. The market had charged me $3,000 for lessons that would prove to be worth millions in the long run. My father tried to be supportive during this time, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He would ask gentle questions about how I was spending my time and whether I needed help finding direction in my life. He had watched me cycle through different phases of sleeping and activity without understanding what was driving these changes. From his perspective, I was a young woman struggling with some kind of motivational or psychological problem that prevented me from holding down steady employment. Roberto had always been proud of his own work ethic and his ability to provide for his family through consistent effort and reliable habits. My erratic schedule and apparent lack of productivity were probably more troubling to him than he let on. He came from a generation that believed success came from showing up every day and doing your job, regardless of how you felt about it. The idea that someone could build wealth through computer-based speculation would have seemed like fantasy to him. But his gentle concern was actually more motivating than Carmen's criticism. I didn't want to disappoint him any longer than necessary. I wanted to prove that his daughter was capable of achieving something significant, even if the path looked different from what he expected. I was determined to rebuild my trading account and create the kind of success that would make him proud. But I was going to do it the right way this time. The process of rebuilding after the crash was slower and more methodical than my initial approach to trading. Instead of looking for big wins that would quickly restore my account balance, I focused on making small, consistent profits that compounded over time. I reduced my position sizes and implemented stricter rules about how much of my account I was willing to risk on any single trade. More importantly, I developed a systematic approach to research and analysis that removed emotion from my trading decisions. I created spreadsheets that tracked the performance of different strategies under various market conditions. I backtested my ideas using historical data to see how they would have performed during previous market cycles. I was turning trading from a gut feeling-based activity into a data-driven process that could be evaluated and improved over time. This methodical approach was less exciting than my previous style of trading, but it was also less stressful. Instead of watching my account balance swing wildly from day to day, I was seeing steady progress that built my confidence gradually. Each small win reinforced the validity of my approach and motivated me to continue refining my strategies. My family couldn't see this progress because they didn't know what I was doing, but they could sense that something about my demeanor had changed. I was less defensive when they made comments about my schedule, and I seemed more focused when I did emerge from my room. I was sleeping better during my designated rest hours because I wasn't constantly worried about overnight market movements that could destroy my account.
The crash had taught me that successful trading isn't about predicting the future or finding secret strategies that guarantee profits. It's about managing uncertainty and positioning yourself to benefit from favorable outcomes while limiting the damage from unfavorable ones. It's about having the discipline to stick to proven strategies even when your emotions are telling you to do something different. This lesson extended beyond trading into other areas of my life. I realized that my secrecy about my activities was creating unnecessary stress for my family and myself.
They were worried about my future because they couldn't see that I was working toward goals, even if those goals were unconventional. I was stressed because I felt constantly judged and misunderstood by the people whose opinions mattered most to me. But I also understood why the secrecy had been necessary, especially during the early stages when my knowledge and confidence were still developing. Trading psychology is fragile, particularly for beginners. External pressure or skepticism can easily derail the learning process by creating doubt at crucial moments. I had needed the psychological space to make mistakes and learn from them without having to justify every decision to people who didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish. Now, however, I was reaching a point where the secrecy was becoming counterproductive. I had developed enough knowledge and discipline to trade successfully regardless of external opinions. More importantly, I was starting to generate consistent profits that could potentially help my family with their financial struggles. The question was how to reveal what I had been doing without destroying the trust and relationships that mattered most to me. The opportunity came during one of our family's increasingly frequent discussions about money. My parents were trying to decide whether to refinance their mortgage to access some equity for my father's upcoming medical procedures. Carmen was advocating for a more aggressive approach that would reduce their monthly payments but extend the term of the loan. They were both valid strategies, but they were also both stopgap measures that didn't address the underlying income problem of insufficient income relative to expenses. I listened to their conversation from the kitchen, where I was making coffee and pretending to be just waking up from another marathon sleep session. The numbers they were discussing were relatively small from my perspective as a trader, but I knew they represented enormous stress and difficult compromises for my parents. My father was talking about working additional overtime to cover the costs, which meant more strain on his already fragile health. That's when I realized that my success would mean nothing if I couldn't use it to help the people I cared about most. I had been so focused on building wealth as an abstract goal that I had lost sight of why wealth matters in the first place. Money is just a tool for creating security and opportunity, and my family needed both. My trading gains were meaningless if they just sat in my account while my parents worried about paying for medical care. But I also knew that revealing my financial situation prematurely could backfire in multiple ways. If my account balance was smaller than I claimed, they might think I was delusional or lying. If it was larger than they expected, they might become dependent on my success rather than developing their own financial stability. I needed to approach this revelation carefully, with a plan for how my success could help them without creating new problems or dependencies. I decided to start by sharing my knowledge rather than my money. During dinner that evening, I brought up the topic of alternative investments and asked if they had ever considered diversifying beyond traditional savings accounts and retirement plans. My father was skeptical about anything that seemed risky, but my mother was intrigued by the possibility of generating better returns on their modest savings. Carmen immediately jumped in with warnings about get-rich-quick schemes and the dangers of gambling with money you can't afford to lose. Her reaction was predictable, but it also gave me an opportunity to demonstrate that I had thought seriously about risk management and conservative investment strategies. I was able to discuss concepts like dollar-cost averaging and portfolio diversification in ways that showed I had done real research rather than just fallen for marketing hype. The conversation continued for over an hour, with my family gradually realizing that I knew much more about finance and investing than they had ever suspected. My father asked where I had learned about these concepts, and I explained that I had been studying them during my periods of apparent inactivity.
This was technically true, even though it was far from the complete truth about what I had been doing. By the end of the evening, they were looking at me differently, not with the mixture of concern and disappointment that had become familiar, but with genuine curiosity about what else I might know that they didn't. Carmen was still skeptical, but even she seemed impressed by my knowledge of financial concepts that she didn't understand. More importantly, I had planted the seeds for future conversations about money and investing that would eventually allow me to reveal the full extent of my trading success. They now knew that I had been studying finance seriously, which would make it easier to explain how I had been able to generate profits through cryptocurrency trading. The next phase of my plan involved demonstrating my knowledge through small, verifiable predictions about market movements. I started making casual comments about economic news and how it might affect different asset classes. When my predictions proved accurate, my family began to take my financial opinions more seriously. This process took several weeks, but it was crucial for building the credibility I would need when I eventually revealed the size of my trading account. I couldn't just announce that I have made a fortune without first proving that I understood how markets work and that my success wasn't just luck. During this period, my trading continued to improve as I refined my strategies and built my account balance back toward previous levels. The conservative approach I had adopted after the crash was generating steady returns that compounded over time. More importantly, I was developing the psychological resilience needed to handle both wins and losses without making emotional decisions that could derail my progress. The market environment was also becoming more favorable as the regulatory uncertainty that had triggered the previous crash began to resolve. New institutional investors were entering the cryptocurrency space, bringing legitimacy and capital that supported higher prices. My technical analysis suggested that we were entering another bull market phase that could last for many months. But this time, I was prepared for both the opportunities and the risks.
I had position sizing rules that prevented me from risking too much capital on any single trade. I had diversification strategies that spread my risk across multiple cryptocurrencies and trading timeframes. Most importantly, I had realistic expectations about what was possible and what could go wrong. The combination of improved market conditions and better risk management began to produce results that exceeded my most optimistic projections. My account balance was not only recovering from the crash, but growing beyond its previous peak. The compounding effect of consistent profits was accelerating, and I was approaching the point where my trading income would exceed what most people make from traditional employment. This success felt different from my earlier gains because it was based on proven strategies rather than beginner's luck. I had survived a major market crash and learned from the experience. I had developed systems and disciplines that could weather future volatility. Most importantly, I had gained the confidence that comes from understanding how markets work, rather than just hoping they would continue to go up. My family was beginning to notice subtle changes in my behavior that reflected this growing confidence. I was more relaxed during our conversations about money because I knew I had solutions to their financial problems. I was less defensive about my unusual schedule because I knew it was producing real results. I was starting to think about the future with excitement rather than anxiety because I could see a path to financial freedom for all of us. But I was also aware that my success was creating new responsibilities and challenges. The larger my account balance grew, the more important it became to have a plan for using that wealth responsibly. I didn't want to just accumulate money for its own sake. I wanted to use my trading profits to create lasting security and opportunity for my family, while continuing to grow my capital for future generations. This meant thinking about tax implications, estate planning, and investment strategies that would preserve wealth over decades rather than just generating short-term profits. I was evolving from a trader focused on making money quickly into an investor thinking about long-term wealth management. This transition required new knowledge and skills that went beyond market analysis and trading psychology. I also had to consider the social and family dynamics that would change once my financial situation became known. Money has a way of altering relationships, sometimes in positive ways, but often in complicated ones. I needed to be prepared for the possibility that my success might create resentment, dependency, or other problems that could damage the relationships I was trying to protect. But despite these concerns, I was becoming increasingly excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. For the first time in my adult life, I could see a clear path to financial independence not just for myself, but for my entire family. The work I had been doing in secret, the sacrifices I had made, and the risks I had taken were all beginning to pay off in ways that would transform our lives forever. The moment of revelation was approaching, and I knew it would change everything. The question was whether my family would be ready to understand and accept what I had accomplished, and whether I would be ready to handle the responsibilities that came with success. But after months of preparation, education, and careful planning, I was finally ready to show them what I had been dreaming up while they thought I was just sleeping my life away. The morning Carmen decided to stage what she called an intervention was the morning everything finally came to a head. She had recruited my parents for what she described as a necessary conversation about my future, and she had prepared a presentation complete with printed articles about adult children who failed to launch and the importance of tough love and motivating personal growth. What she didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering documentation that would completely transform their understanding of who I was and what I had been accomplishing. I woke up that Tuesday morning to the sound of hushed voices in the kitchen, the kind of conspiratorial whispers that meant people were talking about me. Through my bedroom wall, I could hear Carmen's voice rising and falling in the rhythmic cadence of someone making a passionate argument. She was laying out her case for why our parents needed to stop enabling my behavior and start demanding accountability from their adult daughter, who seemed determined to sleep through life. My phone showed dozens of notifications from my trading platforms, alerts about overnight price movements and completed orders that had executed while I slept. Bitcoin had dumped 8% after a major corporation announced they were adding it to their treasury reserves. Ethereum had followed with a 6% gain. Several smaller positions I held in alternative coins had experienced double-digit increases. While my family gathered in the kitchen to discuss my apparent failures, my portfolio had grown by more than $30,000 overnight. The irony was so perfect, it almost felt scripted. As I lay in bed reviewing my gains from the previous night's market activity, I could hear Carmen explaining to our parents why they needed to give me an ultimatum about finding traditional employment or moving out of their house. She had no idea that the person she was describing as irresponsible and unmotivated had just earned more money while sleeping than she would make in an entire year of her administrative job.
I took my time getting dressed that morning, choosing clothes that would reinforce their perception of me as someone who had given up on professional appearances. Sweatpants, an old college t-shirt, and my hair in a messy bun that suggested I had just rolled out of bed. The visual presentation was important because it would make the contrast even more dramatic when I revealed what I had actually been doing with my time. When I finally emerged from my bedroom at 11:30, carrying my laptop and a folder of documents I had prepared for this moment, I found them arranged around our kitchen table like a tribunal. Carmen had her printed articles spread out in front of her, highlighted passages about enabling behaviors and the necessity of consequences for adult children who refuse to accept responsibility. My parents looked uncomfortable but determined, clearly having been convinced that drastic action was necessary. Carmen launched into her prepared speech before I had even poured myself coffee.
She talked about how my sleeping habits had become increasingly problematic and how my apparent lack of motivation was creating stress for everyone in the family. She cited statistics about young adults who struggle with depression and anxiety, suggesting that I needed professional help combined with clear expectations about contributing to household expenses and actively seeking employment. My father nodded along with her points, his face showing the strain of someone who had been wrestling with a difficult decision. He loved me and wanted to support me, But he also believed that sometimes love required making hard choices that forced people to grow. My mother kept glancing between Carmen and me, clearly torn between wanting to help and worrying about pushing me away when I might need support the most. I listened to Carmen's entire presentation without interrupting, sipping my coffee and occasionally nodding as if I was seriously considering her points. When she finished by proposing a 30-day deadline for me to find employment or alternative living arrangements, I set down my cup and opened my laptop on the kitchen table. The first thing I showed them was my main trading account dashboard, displaying my current portfolio value in large, unmistakable numbers. The figure on the screen was $2.4 million. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the background and a neighbor starting their lawnmower 3 houses away. Carmen stared at the screen with her mouth slightly open, her prepared speech about accountability and responsibility suddenly seeming inadequate for the situation. My father blinked slowly, the way he did when he was trying to process information that didn't fit his existing understanding of the world. My mother reached across the table and touched the laptop screen as if she needed to confirm that the numbers were real and not some kind of digital illusion. The first question came from my father, his voice barely above a whisper. He asked if the numbers represented real money or some kind of simulation or game. I clicked through several different trading platforms, showing them the same portfolio value reflected across multiple exchanges and wallets. I pulled up my transaction history, demonstrating months of consistent trading activity that had built this wealth gradually rather than through a single lucky bet. Carmen found her voice next, demanding to know how this was possible and whether I had gotten involved in something illegal or dangerous. The accusation stung, but I understood why she would think that. From her perspective, the idea that someone could generate millions of dollars from a bedroom computer seemed too fantastic to be legitimate. I spent the next hour walking them through the basics of cryptocurrency trading, showing them educational resources and explaining the research process that had led to my success. But what seemed to convince them more than any explanation was the evidence of systematic preparation and professional approach I had developed. I showed them my trading journal, detailed spreadsheets tracking the performance of different strategies, and the risk management protocols I had implemented after learning from early mistakes. This wasn't gambling or get-rich-quick scheming. This was a disciplined approach to financial markets that required extensive knowledge and careful execution. My mother was the first to shift from shock to understanding, asking questions about how I had learned these skills and why I had kept my activities secret for so long. I explained that cryptocurrency trading was still viewed with skepticism by many people, particularly older generations who associated it with speculation and fraud. I had needed time to develop confidence in my abilities before I could handle external opinions and advice from people who didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish. Carmen's reaction was more complex. She cycled through disbelief, anger, embarrassment, and finally a grudging respect for what I had achieved. The person she had been lecturing about responsibility and accountability had actually been taking enormous responsibility for our family's financial future, while she focused on conventional approaches that would never generate the kind of wealth needed to solve our problems. But her anger was also understandable. For months, she had been positioning herself as the responsible daughter who was trying to help our parents deal with their problematic younger child. She had invested significant emotional energy in being the voice of tough love and practical wisdom. Discovering that her target had actually been more successful than anyone in the family was a blow to her sense of identity and competence. My father's response was perhaps the most touching. Once he understood that my success was real and legitimate, he began asking detailed questions about my strategies and market analysis. He wanted to understand not just what I had accomplished, but how I had accomplished it. His curiosity reminded me of when I was young and would show him school projects. He had always been interested in learning about things he didn't understand, and his genuine fascination with my trading methods helped bridge the gap between his traditional views of work and my unconventional path to success. The conversation continued for over 3 hours, with my family gradually adjusting to a completely new understanding of who I was and what I had been doing with my time. Carmen's intervention had backfired spectacularly, but in a way that ultimately brought us closer together rather than driving us apart.
Instead of proving that I needed more structure and accountability, the morning had revealed that I had been more structured and accountable than any of them had imagined. But showing them my account balance was only the beginning of what I had planned for this day. The real purpose of my revelation wasn't to impress them with my success, but to demonstrate how that success could transform their lives and eliminate the financial stress that had been weighing on our family for years. I pulled out the folder I had prepared containing detailed analyses of their financial situations and proposals for how my trading profits could address their specific challenges. For Carmen, I had calculated the exact amount needed to pay off her credit card debt and provide her with a foundation for rebuilding her credit and financial independence. For my parents, I had researched solutions for their medical expenses, mortgage concerns, and retirement planning that would allow them to live comfortably without the constant worry about money that had dominated their conversations for years. Carmen's debt situation was more severe than I had initially realized. In addition to the $18,000 in credit card balances I had overheard her discussing, she had also taken out a personal loan to cover legal fees from her divorce and had fallen behind on payments for her car loan. The total amount needed to give her a fresh start was close to $35,000, but that represented less than 2% of my current portfolio value.
My parents' financial challenges were more complex, but equally solvable. My father's recent medical procedures had generated bills that exceeded their insurance coverage by nearly $15,000. Their mortgage had another 12 years of payments remaining, representing about $90,000 in principal and interest. They had virtually nothing saved for retirement beyond my father's modest pension plan, which would provide less than half of their current income when he eventually stopped working. But what struck me most as I reviewed their situations was how relatively small these problems were compared to the resources I now had available. The amounts that represented major stress and difficult sacrifices for them were easily manageable from my perspective as someone who had built substantial wealth through trading. I could solve every financial problem they faced without significantly impacting my own security or future earning potential. The proposal I presented to them was carefully structured to provide immediate relief while also building long-term financial stability. I offered to pay off Carmen's debts immediately, giving her a clean slate and the opportunity to focus on rebuilding her career without the burden of high interest payments. For my parents, I proposed paying off their medical bills and mortgage while also establishing investment accounts that would generate passive income to supplement my father's pension when he retired. But perhaps most importantly, I wanted to share my knowledge and teach them how to build their own wealth rather than simply giving them money. I had learned that financial independence comes from understanding how money works, not just from having money. I offered to teach them about investing, to help them understand the principles that had guided my success, and to involve them in managing the family's growing wealth. The emotional impact of these proposals was immediate and overwhelming. My mother began crying as she realized that the medical bills she had been worrying about for months could be eliminated with a simple transfer of funds. My father sat quietly for several minutes, processing the idea that he could potentially reduce his working hours without compromising their financial security. Even Carmen seemed stunned by the possibility of starting over without the debt that had been constraining her choices since her divorce. But her gratitude was mixed with disbelief and concern about accepting such generous help from their daughter. They had spent months worrying about my future and ability to support myself, and now I was offering to support them in ways they had never imagined possible. The role reversal was emotionally complex for all of us, requiring adjustments to family dynamics that had been established over decades. My father expressed concern about becoming dependent on my success rather than maintaining their own independence and self-sufficiency. These were valid concerns that I had anticipated and prepared to address. I explained that my offer wasn't about creating dependency, but about providing the foundation of security that would allow them to make choices based on what they wanted rather than what they could afford. Carmen's reaction was more complicated because accepting my help required acknowledging that her assessment of my character and prospects had been completely wrong. She had positioned herself as the successful daughter who was trying to help our parents deal with their problematic younger child. Now, she was being offered financial assistance by the same person she had been criticizing for months.
Her pride was understandably bruised, but her practical needs were also undeniable. I spent considerable time that day addressing their concerns and explaining why helping them was important to me personally, not just financially possible. My success felt meaningless if I couldn't use it to improve the lives of the people I cared about most. The money I had earned through trading was valuable precisely because it could eliminate stress and create opportunities for my family. More importantly, I wanted them to understand that their support during my unconventional journey had been crucial to my success. Even when they didn't understand what I was doing, even when they worried about my choices, they had provided me with the stability and encouragement needed to pursue an uncertain path. My financial gains were built on a foundation of family support that deserved to be repaid with interest. The practical details of implementing my proposals required careful planning and professional assistance. I had already consulted with accountants and financial advisors to understand the tax implications of large gifts and transfers between family members. I had researched investment strategies that would provide steady income for my parents while preserving principal for long-term growth. I had even identified legal and financial professionals who could help Carmen rebuild her credit and establish better money management habits. But beyond the technical aspects of wealth transfer and investment management, I wanted to create a family culture around money that would prevent future problems and build lasting prosperity. This meant having honest conversations about spending habits, saving strategies, and financial goals that aligned with our values and priorities. It meant teaching my parents and Carmen the same principles of research and risk management that had guided my trading success. The transformation in our family dynamic was immediate and profound. Conversations that had been dominated by stress and worry about money were replaced with discussions about opportunities and possibilities. My parents began talking about travel plans they had postponed for years due to financial constraints. Carmen started considering career changes that would be more fulfilling, but had previously seemed financially impossible. But perhaps most significant change was in how they viewed my unconventional schedule and approach to work. Instead of seeing my sleeping patterns as evidence of laziness or depression, they began to understand that I had been operating on a global schedule that required attention to markets in different time zones. Instead of worrying about my lack of traditional employment, they realized that I had built something much more valuable than a conventional job. The respect and admiration in their voices when they talked about my accomplishments was overwhelming after months of feeling misunderstood and underestimated. Carmen apologized repeatedly for her harsh comments and intervention attempts. My parents expressed pride in my achievements and gratitude for my willingness to share my success with the family. But I also made it clear that my support came with expectations and boundaries.
I wasn't going to enable irresponsible financial behavior or create a situation where my family became dependent on my trading profits without developing their own financial literacy and planning skills. The help I was offering was meant to provide a foundation for their own success, not to replace their need to make good decisions about money. Within a week of our kitchen table revelation, we had implemented the first phase of my financial assistance plan. Carmen's debts were paid off, giving her monthly budget breathing room she hadn't experienced in years. My parents' medical bills were eliminated, removing a major source of stress that had been affecting my father's health and my mother's sleep. The mortgage payoff would take longer to complete due to banking procedures, but the process was underway. More importantly, we had begun the family education process that would ensure my success translated into lasting financial security for all of us. I started teaching them about different investment vehicles, explaining how compound interest works, and sharing the research methods that helped me identify profitable opportunities. They were eager students, finally understanding that financial education was practical knowledge that could improve their lives, rather than abstract theory with no real-world application. The neighborhood began to notice changes in our family's lifestyle and stress levels, but we were careful to maintain privacy about the source of our improved circumstances. We simply explained that I had been working on some investments that had performed well. This was technically true, while avoiding discussions about cryptocurrency that might lead to unwanted attention or requests for investment advice from people who weren't prepared for the risks involved. Carmen's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all.
Within a month of having her debts eliminated, she had gained a new lease on her career and personal life. She started dating again, something she had avoided due to embarrassment about her financial situation. She began making plans for career advancement that had previously seemed impossible due to the constraints of debt payments. Most importantly, she developed a new respect for unconventional approaches to success that allowed her to be more supportive of my continued trading activities. My parents used their newfound financial freedom to focus on their health and relationship in ways that had been impossible when they were stressed about money. My father reduced his overtime hours and started taking better care of himself. My mother enrolled in art classes she had been wanting to take for years but couldn't afford. They began planning a vacation to visit relatives they hadn't seen in over a decade due to travel costs. But the success of my intervention went beyond just solving immediate financial problems. It had fundamentally changed how our family communicated about money, goals, and support for each other's unconventional choices. We had learned that success can take many different forms, and that supporting each other sometimes means trusting processes we don't fully understand. The morning that had started with Carmen's intervention about my sleeping habits had ended with a complete transformation of our family's financial future and relationships. While they had been planning to confront me about my apparent failures, I had been preparing to share success beyond their wildest imagination. The conversation that was supposed to motivate me to find traditional employment had instead revealed that I had built wealth that would allow all of us to pursue our dreams without the constraints of financial desperation. Looking back on that pivotal day, I realized that the months of secrecy and misunderstanding had actually been necessary preparation for this moment. My family needed to see concrete evidence of my success rather than just promises or explanations. They needed to understand that my unconventional approach had produced conventional results, namely financial security and the freedom that comes with it. But more than anything, they needed to see that my success was always intended to benefit all of us, not just myself. The wealth I had built through cryptocurrency trading was valuable precisely because it could eliminate their financial stress and create opportunities for them to pursue their own forms of success and fulfillment. While they thought I was sleeping through their struggles, I had actually been working harder than ever to build solutions that would transform all our lives forever. 6 months after the morning that changed everything, I was sitting in my new home office watching the sunrise through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. The room was nothing like the cluttered bedroom where I had built my fortune in secret. Professional monitors displayed real-time market data from exchanges around the world, and custom-built trading workstations allowed me to manage multiple strategies simultaneously. But what made this space truly special wasn't the equipment or the view. It was the fact that my family finally understood and respected what I did here. The transformation in our relationships had been more profound than I ever imagined possible. Carmen now called me twice a week to discuss investment opportunities and ask for advice about financial decisions. My parents had become genuinely interested in learning about markets and economic trends, turning our dinner conversations into informal education sessions about wealth building and financial planning. The person they had once worried about sleeping her life away had become the family's chief financial officer and strategic advisor. But the changes went beyond just money and investing. My father had been able to retire 6 months earlier than planned, using the passive income from his new investment portfolio to supplement his pension. Instead of working double shifts to cover medical expenses, he was spending his mornings in the garden and his afternoons volunteering at the community center where he taught woodworking to teenagers. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, and he moved with an energy I hadn't seen since before his accident years earlier. My mother had embraced her newfound financial freedom by pursuing passions she had set aside during decades of economic constraint. Her art classes had led to a small studio space where she created pottery that she sold at local craft fairs. The income wasn't significant compared to our family's new wealth, but the satisfaction she derived from building something beautiful with her hands was priceless. She had also started traveling to visit relatives and old friends, nurturing relationships that had been neglected due to financial limitations. Carmen's transformation was perhaps the most dramatic of all. She returned to well-being and happiness after years of struggle with her debts, which had led her to live in the shadows.
Free from the crushing burden of debt payments, she had been able to take risks with her career that led to a management position at a marketing firm downtown. Her confidence had returned along with her financial stability, and she was dating a man who appreciated her intelligence and ambition rather than seeing her as damaged goods from a failed marriage. Most importantly, she had learned to view unconventional paths to success with respect rather than suspicion. The house we had shared during my secret trading phase had been renovated into a comfortable family home where we could all live independently while maintaining close relationships. My parents occupied the main floor, which had been modified to accommodate their aging needs with wider doorways and accessible bathroom fixtures. Carmen had the entire second floor as her private apartment, complete with a separate entrance that allowed her to maintain her privacy while remaining connected to the family. My space was the converted basement, which had been transformed into a sophisticated trading facility and living area that reflected my new status as a professional investor. The room where I had once hidden my activities behind closed doors was now an open workspace where family members could observe my trading process and learn about market analysis. The secrecy that had once been necessary for protecting my fragile confidence was no longer needed now that my success was established and respected. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how we communicated about dreams and goals. The family that had once viewed my unconventional schedule as evidence of laziness now understood that success sometimes requires approaches that don't fit traditional expectations. My parents had learned to ask about my trading strategies with the same interest they once showed in Carmen's conventional career progression. Carmen had begun exploring her own entrepreneurial ideas, emboldened by seeing how unconventional thinking could produce extraordinary results. The financial education process I had initiated with my family had evolved into something much more comprehensive than I originally planned. What started as basic lessons about investing had become a family project to build generational wealth that would benefit not just us, but future descendants who weren't even born yet. We were thinking in terms of decades and centuries rather than months and years, creating investment strategies that would compound over time periods that most families never consider. My trading activities had also evolved to match our expanded goals and responsibilities. The aggressive strategies that had built my initial fortune were gradually being replaced by more conservative approaches focused on preserving wealth while generating steady income. I was shifting from a trader seeking maximum returns to a portfolio manager balancing growth with stability. The psychological pressure of trading with money I couldn't afford to lose had been replaced by the satisfaction of managing resources that could support multiple generations. But perhaps the most meaningful change was in how we communicated about dreams and goals. The family that had once viewed my unconventional schedule as evidence of laziness now understood that success sometimes requires approaches that don't fit traditional expectations. My parents had learned to ask about my trading strategies with the same interest they once showed in Carmen's conventional career progression. Carmen had begun exploring her own entrepreneurial ideas, emboldened by seeing how unconventional thinking could produce extraordinary results. The financial education process I had initiated with my family had evolved into something much more comprehensive than I originally planned. What started as basic lessons about investing had become a family project to build generational wealth that would benefit not just us, but future descendants who weren't even born yet. We were thinking in terms of decades and centuries rather than months and years, creating investment strategies that would compound over time periods that most families never consider. My trading activities had also evolved to match our expanded goals and responsibilities. The aggressive strategies that had built my initial fortune were gradually being replaced by more conservative approaches focused on preserving wealth while generating steady income. I was shifting from a trader seeking maximum returns to a portfolio manager balancing growth with stability. The psychological pressure of trading with money I couldn't afford to lose had been replaced by the satisfaction of managing resources that could support multiple generations. But success had also brought new challenges and responsibilities that I hadn't anticipated during my bedroom trading days. Managing significant wealth requires expertise in tax planning, estate planning, and legal structures that protect assets from various risks. I had hired professionals to help navigate these complexities, but I remained actively involved in all major decisions affecting our family's financial future.
The cryptocurrency market had continued its volatile patterns of boom and bust cycles, but my improved risk management strategies had allowed me to profit from both rising and falling markets. More importantly, I had diversified beyond digital assets into traditional investments like real estate, stocks, and bonds that provided stability during periods of crypto market uncertainty. The lessons learned from my early crash had evolved into a comprehensive investment philosophy that prioritized preservation of capital above aggressive growth. My reputation within the cryptocurrency trading community had grown as word spread about my systematic approach and consistent results. I had been invited to speak at conferences and contribute to online forums where experienced traders shared strategies and market insights. But I had declined most of these opportunities, preferring to maintain privacy about my methods and avoid the attention that comes with public success in speculative markets. The decision to remain relatively anonymous had proven wise as cryptocurrency trading became increasingly mainstream and attracted more regulatory scrutiny. Many early traders who had sought publicity for their success later faced unwanted attention from tax authorities and potential legal complications. My approach of building wealth quietly while maintaining a low public profile had protected our family from these risks while allowing us to enjoy the benefits of financial success. Carmen had become particularly interested in the privacy and security aspects of wealth management, taking courses in cybersecurity and financial privacy that complemented her marketing background. She had assumed responsibility for protecting our family's digital assets and online presence, ensuring that our increased wealth didn't make us targets for cybercriminals or social engineering attacks. Her attention to these details had prevented several attempted scams that targeted our family after we began making larger financial transactions. My parents had embraced the role as the family's wisdom council, providing guidance on major decisions based on their decades of life experience. While they didn't fully understand all the technical aspects of modern investing, they offered valuable perspectives on risk management and long-term thinking that kept our planning grounded in practical reality. Their advice had prevented several investment mistakes that could have jeopardized our financial security. But beyond the practical aspects of wealth management, our family had developed a shared sense of purpose about using our resources to make a positive impact on our community. We had established a modest charitable foundation that supported local organizations focused on financial literacy and entrepreneurship education. The foundation's mission reflected our belief that everyone deserved access to the knowledge and opportunities that had transformed our own lives. The educational work had become particularly meaningful to me as I witnessed other families struggling with the same financial stress that had once dominated our household conversations. Through workshops and mentoring programs, I was able to share knowledge about investing and wealth building while maintaining privacy about the specific strategies that had generated our success. The goal wasn't to create more cryptocurrency traders, but to help people develop financial literacy skills that could improve their lives regardless of their chosen career paths. My relationship with sleep had also normalized as the stress and secrecy of my early trading period faded into memory. I no longer needed to maintain unusual hours to hide my activities or catch opportunities in foreign markets during their active trading sessions. My trading systems had become sophisticated enough to operate with minimal supervision, allowing me to maintain regular sleep schedules while still capitalizing on market opportunities. The physical health improvements that came with reduced stress and better sleep were noticeable to everyone around me. I had more energy for family activities and social relationships that had been neglected during my intense focus on building wealth. The isolation that had been necessary for protecting my trading psychology was no longer needed now that my financial security was established and my family understood my work.
The months when my family worried about my sleeping habits had actually been the most productive period of my life, even though the productivity wasn't visible to outside observers. The discipline required to maintain focus on long-term goals while enduring short-term criticism had been essential training for the patience needed to build lasting wealth. But perhaps the most valuable lesson had been learning that success often requires temporary sacrifices in relationships and social expectations. My family's initial concern about my unconventional schedule had been based on love and worry about my future, not on any desire to limit my potential. Once they understood what I was actually accomplishing, their support became even stronger than it had been during conventional career phases. The story of my transformation from unemployed daughter to family financial strategist had become a source of inspiration for other young adults in our community who were struggling to find their place in a changing economy. Through informal mentoring relationships and speaking opportunities at local colleges, I had been able to share the message that success sometimes requires approaches that don't fit traditional expectations. But I was always careful to emphasize the importance of education, risk management, and realistic expectations when discussing my experience with cryptocurrency trading. The vast majority of people who attempted to replicate my success without proper preparation and discipline would lose money rather than build wealth. My achievements had been the result of months of intensive study and careful planning, not luck or insider knowledge. The family that had once been divided by misunderstandings about productivity and responsibility had become a coordinated team working toward shared goals of financial security and personal fulfillment. Our weekly family meetings now focused on investment strategy and charitable giving rather than concerns about employment and household expenses. The stress that had once dominated our conversations had been replaced by excitement about possibilities and gratitude for opportunities. As I watched the sun rise over the city where I had built my fortune through careful planning and persistent effort, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond just financial success. The wealth I had accumulated was meaningful precisely because it had eliminated stress and created opportunities for the people I cared about most. The months when my family thought I was sleeping my life away had actually been spent dreaming up solutions that would change all our lives forever. The morning Carmen had planned her intervention about my sleeping habits seemed like a lifetime ago, even though only months had passed. The person who had worried about my lack of conventional productivity could never have imagined that I was actually working harder than anyone in our family to build a foundation of security that would benefit all of us for generations to come. Now, as I prepared for another day of managing our family's investments and exploring new opportunities for growth and impact, I smiled at the memory of those mornings when I had pretended to just wake up while hiding the evidence of overnight trading sessions. The deception had been necessary for protecting a fragile opportunity, but the truth had proven to be more powerful than any fiction I could have invented. My family had learned that success comes in many forms and that supporting each other sometimes means trusting processes we don't fully understand. I had learned that building wealth is only meaningful when it can be shared with people who matter most. Together, we had discovered that the most valuable dreams are the ones that become reality through persistent effort and strategic thinking, even when others mistake that effort for sleep. The year following our family's financial transformation brought challenges I hadn't anticipated during my bedroom trading days. Success, I discovered, creates its own set of problems that require different skills than those needed to build wealth in the first place. Managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio while maintaining family relationships and personal well-being proved to be more complex than any trading strategy I had ever developed. The first major challenge came from unexpected attention from distant relatives and acquaintances who somehow learned about our improved circumstances. Despite our efforts to maintain privacy, word had spread through our community that the Castellanos family had experienced a dramatic change in fortune. People who had barely acknowledged our existence during our struggling years suddenly began reaching out with investment opportunities, business proposals, and requests for financial assistance. Carmen handled most of these inquiries with the diplomatic skills she had developed in her marketing career, but the constant stream of approaches was emotionally draining for all of us. My parents, who had lived modestly their entire lives, found it difficult to understand why people they barely knew felt entitled to share in our success. The experience taught us valuable lessons about the importance of boundaries and the need to protect our privacy even more carefully than we had initially realized. My trading activities had evolved significantly as our wealth grew and my responsibilities expanded. The high-risk, high-reward strategies that had built our initial fortune were gradually replaced by more conservative approaches focused on wealth preservation and steady income generation. I had learned that maintaining wealth requires different skills than creating it, and that the psychological pressures change dramatically when you're managing life-changing amounts of money. The cryptocurrency market continued its characteristic volatility, but I had developed systems that allowed me to profit from market movements in both directions. More importantly, I had diversified our holdings across multiple asset classes, including real estate, traditional stocks, bonds, and alternative investments that provided stability during periods of crypto market turbulence. The portfolio that had once been concentrated entirely in digital assets now resembled the holdings of a sophisticated family office. But perhaps the most significant development was the launch of our family's educational initiative focused on financial literacy and entrepreneurship.
What had started as informal conversations about investing had evolved into a structured program that served dozens of families in our community. Carmen had taken the lead on developing curriculum and managing operations, while I provided technical expertise about markets and investment strategies. The educational program had grown beyond our initial expectations, attracting participants from neighboring communities who were eager to learn about building wealth through non-traditional approaches. We were careful to emphasize the importance of education, risk management, and realistic expectations when discussing my experience with cryptocurrency trading. The vast majority of people who attempted to replicate my success without proper preparation and discipline would lose money rather than build wealth. My achievements had been the result of months of intensive study and careful planning, not luck or insider knowledge.
The family that had once been divided by misunderstandings about productivity and responsibility had become a coordinated team working toward shared goals of financial security and personal fulfillment. Our weekly family meetings now focused on investment strategy and charitable giving rather than concerns about employment and household expenses. The stress that had once dominated our conversations had been replaced by excitement about possibilities and gratitude for opportunities. As I watched the sun rise over the city where I had built my fortune through careful planning and persistent effort, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond just financial success. The wealth I had accumulated was meaningful precisely because it had eliminated stress and created opportunities for the people I cared about most. The months when my family thought I was sleeping my life away had actually been spent dreaming up solutions that would change all our lives forever. The morning Carmen had planned her intervention about my sleeping habits seemed like a lifetime ago, even though only months had passed. The person who had worried about my lack of conventional productivity could never have imagined that I was actually working harder than anyone in our family to build a foundation of security that would benefit all of us for generations to come. Now, as I prepared for another day of managing our family's investments and exploring new opportunities for growth and impact, I smiled at the memory of those mornings when I had pretended to just wake up while hiding the evidence of overnight trading sessions. The deception had been necessary for protecting a fragile opportunity, but the truth had proven to be more powerful than any fiction I could have invented. My family had learned that success comes in many forms, and that supporting each other sometimes means trusting processes we don't fully understand. I had learned that building wealth is only meaningful when it can be shared with people who matter. Together, we had discovered that the most valuable dreams are the ones that become reality through persistent effort and strategic thinking, even when others mistake that effort for sleep. The year following our family's financial transformation brought challenges I hadn't anticipated during my bedroom trading days. Success, I discovered, creates its own set of problems that require different skills than those needed to build wealth in the first place. Managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio while maintaining family relationships and personal well-being proved to be more complex than any trading strategy I had ever developed. The first major challenge came from unexpected attention from distant relatives and acquaintances who somehow learned about our improved circumstances. Despite our efforts to maintain privacy, word had spread through our community that the Castellanos family had experienced a dramatic change in fortune. People who had barely acknowledged our existence during our struggling years suddenly began reaching out with investment opportunities, business proposals, and requests for financial assistance. Carmen handled most of these inquiries with the diplomatic skills she had developed in her marketing career, but the constant stream of approaches was emotionally draining for all of us. My parents, who had lived modestly their entire lives, found it difficult to understand why people they barely knew felt entitled to share in our success. The experience taught us valuable lessons about the importance of boundaries and the need to protect our privacy even more carefully than we had initially realized. My trading activities had evolved significantly as our wealth grew and my responsibilities expanded. The high-risk, high-reward strategies that had built our initial fortune were gradually replaced by more conservative approaches focused on wealth preservation and steady income generation. I had learned that maintaining wealth requires different skills than creating it, and that the psychological pressures change dramatically when you're managing life-changing amounts of money. The cryptocurrency market continued its characteristic volatility, but I had developed systems that allowed me to profit from market movements in both directions. More importantly,
I had diversified our holdings across multiple asset classes, including real estate, traditional stocks, bonds, and alternative investments that provided stability during periods of crypto market turbulence. The portfolio that had once been concentrated entirely in digital assets now resembled the holdings of a sophisticated family office. But perhaps the most significant development was the launch of our family's educational initiative focused on financial literacy and entrepreneurship. What had started as informal conversations about investing had evolved into a structured program that served dozens of families in our community. Carmen had taken the lead on developing curriculum and managing operations, while I provided technical expertise about markets and investment strategies. The educational program had grown beyond our initial expectations, attracting participants from neighboring communities who were eager to learn about building wealth through non-traditional approaches. We were careful to emphasize the importance of education, risk management, and realistic expectations, rather than promoting cryptocurrency trading as a get-rich-quick scheme. The goal was to teach principles of financial literacy that could improve lives regardless of the specific investment vehicles people chose to pursue. My relationship with the broader cryptocurrency community had also evolved as my reputation for systematic approaches and consistent results became more widely known. I had been invited to contribute to several research projects examining the long-term viability of digital assets as components of diversified portfolios. But I maintained strict boundaries about sharing specific strategies or account information, preferring to focus on general principles rather than tactical details. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that resulted from this recognition provided additional income streams that further diversified our family's revenue sources. But more importantly, they allowed me to contribute to the broader understanding of how cryptocurrency markets function and how individual investors can participate safely and profitably. The knowledge I had gained through months of intensive self-education was proving valuable to academic researchers and institutional investors who were still developing their understanding of digital asset markets. Carmen's business ventures had flourished with the support of our improved financial foundation.
She had launched a consulting firm that helped small businesses develop digital marketing strategies, drawing on her corporate experience while maintaining the flexibility to focus on clients and projects she found personally meaningful. The elimination of financial pressure had allowed her to be selective about her work, rather than accepting any opportunity that offered immediate income. Her personal relationships had also stabilized as the stress of debt and financial insecurity faded from her daily experience. The man she had been dating had proposed, and they were planning a wedding that would reflect their shared values rather than being constrained by budget limitations. The contrast with her previous marriage, which had been complicated by financial stress from the beginning, was striking and encouraging. My parents had embraced their role as the family's elder statesmen, providing wisdom and perspective that balanced my technical expertise with practical life experience. My father had become particularly interested in the real estate investments that now comprised a significant portion of our portfolio, applying his construction background to evaluate potential acquisitions and improvement projects. My mother had taken responsibility for coordinating our charitable giving, ensuring that our donations aligned with our values and had meaningful impact on the recipients. But the most profound change had been in our family's long-term planning and goal-setting process. We had shifted from thinking in terms of monthly budgets and annual financial goals to developing strategies that would preserve and grow our wealth across multiple generations. The conversations that once focused on paying bills and managing immediate expenses now covered topics like estate planning, tax optimization, and philanthropic legacy building. This multi-generational perspective had influenced every aspect of our financial decision-making, from investment selection to spending priorities to educational planning. We were creating structures that would benefit not just our immediate family, but children and grandchildren who weren't yet born. The responsibility of stewardship for such significant resources was both inspiring and sobering, requiring careful thought about values and priorities that would guide future generations. The neighborhood where we had lived during my secret trading period had become a laboratory for understanding how sudden wealth affects community relationships and social dynamics. Some neighbors had become more friendly and inclusive once our improved circumstances became apparent, while others had grown distant or resentful.
We had learned to navigate these changing relationships with grace and understanding, recognizing that other people's reactions to our success often reflected their own financial insecurities rather than genuine feelings about our family. The home renovations that had transformed our shared living space into comfortable, separate areas for each family member had been completed with attention to both functionality and aesthetics. But more importantly, the design had preserved the communal spaces where we gathered for meals and family meetings, maintaining the close relationships that had sustained us through difficult periods. The house had become a symbol of how financial success could enhance family bonds rather than disrupting them. My personal trading workspace had evolved into a sophisticated facility that rivaled the operations of professional investment firms. Multiple monitors displayed real-time market data from exchanges around the world, while custom software executed complex strategies that would have been impossible to manage manually. But the technology was less important than the systematic approach to risk management and decision-making that had developed over months of experience and continuous learning. The psychological aspects of managing significant wealth had required ongoing attention and professional support. I had begun working with a therapist who specialized in helping high net worth individuals navigate the emotional challenges that accompany sudden financial success. The isolation that can result from having experiences that most people can't relate to was a real concern that required active management through maintained connections with friends and community members who knew me before my trading success. The educational resources I had consumed during my intensive learning period had expanded into a personal library covering economics, psychology, history, and philosophy as they related to wealth creation and management. The knowledge that had once been focused narrowly on cryptocurrency trading now encompassed broader understanding of how financial markets function within social and political systems. This expanded perspective had improved both my investment decision-making and my ability to teach others about building sustainable wealth. Looking toward the future, our family had begun developing plans for expanding our educational initiatives and charitable activities in ways that would create lasting positive impact on our community. The foundation we had established was still modest compared to our overall resources, but it represented a commitment to using our success to benefit others rather than simply accumulating wealth for its own sake. The programs we were developing would provide financial education and entrepreneurship support for young adults who faced the same challenges I had encountered when I first lost my job. The story of my transformation from unemployed daughter hiding in her bedroom to successful investor managing family wealth had become a source of inspiration for others in our community who were struggling to find their path in an uncertain economy. But I was always careful to emphasize the importance of education, preparation, and realistic expectations when sharing my experience with others who might be tempted to pursue similar strategies without adequate knowledge or risk management skills. The family meetings that had once been dominated by concerns about expenses and bill payments now focused on investment strategy, charitable giving, and long-term planning for multiple generations. The stress that had characterized our relationships during financially difficult periods had been replaced by excitement about possibilities and gratitude for opportunities. We had learned that money problems can be solved with money, but that lasting happiness requires strong relationships and meaningful purposes that go beyond financial success. As I reflected on the journey from secret trading sessions to established wealth management, I was struck by how much personal growth had been required to handle success responsibly. The discipline needed to build wealth had been different from the wisdom required to preserve it and deploy it effectively. The months when my family worried about my sleeping habits had been essential preparation for the responsibilities I now carried as the family's primary financial strategist. The transformation of our family's circumstances had vindicated my belief that unconventional approaches can produce extraordinary results when they're based on solid research and systematic execution. But it had also taught me that success creates new obligations to use resources wisely and to help others who are still struggling with the same challenges we had overcome. The wealth we had built was meaningful precisely because it could be shared and used to create positive impact beyond our immediate family circle. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.